The first time I saw Idris park, he was holding a clipboard and staring at my control room like he was already composing the violation notice in his head. I was 22 years old, 7 weeks into my emergency shift supervisor qualification, and I had absolutely no idea I was looking at the person who was about to dismantle every defense mechanism I'd ever constructed. He had the kind of focus that made you want to be better at your job. Sharp cheekbones, black-framed glasses, a jaw set like a geometric proof. And he had the kind of face that made it impossible to look away, which I resented immediately and professionally. That was a Monday morning at 6:04 a.m. By the following Saturday at 3:47 a.m., a 4.7 magnitude earthquake would be rolling under the foundation of this plant. 2 reactors would be in automatic shutdown, and Idris Park would be locked alone in emergency cooldown. Corridor B3 with a failed door latch, a dying phone flashlight, and whatever thoughts a person thinks when the earth decides to stop being quiet. I'm going to tell you all of it. Stay with me until the camera sees us standing at the gate. I promise you the ending earns every minute. The McNary River Nuclear Station sits on a limestone bluff above the Kentucky River, 40 miles east of Paducah. Part of the Tennessee Valley Authority's baseload network, 1,150 megawatts, 18 years of operational history and excellent safety record. I'd wanted to work inside this plant since I was 15 years old, when my uncle brought me on a public tour and I stood in the visitor gallery watching the control room operators through a pane of plate glass and felt something in my chest that I could only describe as recognition. 4 years later, I was inside it. I knew the sound of every instrument, the specific vibration of the floor during summer peak load afternoons, which coffee machine on B deck ran 4 degrees too hot. I knew this plant the way you know a piece of music you've been playing for years, not from the sheet but from the body. Idris Park knew it the way a surgeon reads a scan, precisely. Looking for what didn't belong, he was 23. NRC Region III, Junior Resident Inspector, Oregon State undergrad, Master's in Nuclear Engineering from MIT, which sounds more impressive than it is, he said, which was his exact way of indicating he knew precisely how impressive it was. He joined the Nuclear Regulatory Commission because he believed the work of keeping nuclear power safe was among the most important work in existence, and he wanted to do it with his full attention. He spent the first 48 hours reviewing records I'd compiled and finding 3 minor documentation gaps. Timestamps on 2 procedural logs that didn't align within the required window, a maintenance deferral entered with the wrong justification code, nothing safety significant, everything needing correction. But what nobody warned me about the inspection, the thing nobody in my supervisor qualification course mentioned, was that the most exacting person I'd ever encountered would also be the most patient. "I'm not here to build a case," he told me on day 2 in the conference room off the main control room, when I came in with the corrected logs and something on my face that probably looked like controlled resentment. "I'm here to verify that your processes are as strong as your record suggests. Those are different things. They feel like the same thing from where I'm standing." He took off his glasses and cleaned them, slowly, methodically. I would come to understand this as the gesture he made before saying something he'd thought through with full attention. "Your team's response during the last ATWS drill was in the top quartile for Region III. I'm not questioning your competence. I'm checking the load-bearing walls." I sat down across from him. "Is that your version of a compliment?" "It's an accurate characterization of my methodology." A pause. Then, "Your methodology includes eating lunch? Because it's 12:30 and you've been in this room since 6. He looked at his watch, something recalibrated behind his eyes. "The cafeteria on this site is actually functional. The fish sandwich on Fridays is legitimately transcendent. I'm completely serious." For the first time since he'd walked through the security gate with his badge and his clipboard and his institutional authority, Idris Park smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that arrives before it's been given permission. And it did something to the inside of my chest that I couldn't locate in any procedure manual, which was inconvenient, because procedure manuals were my primary coping mechanism. Here's the part that will stay with me forever. The days between his arrival and the earthquake were their own kind of emergency, just slower. We started having lunch every day without planning to. I found reasons to walk him through systems in person rather than handing over documentation, and he started asking questions that weren't on the inspection form. "How does your team handle competing priorities during a concurrent degraded conditions event? Walk me through an actual decision point." And I found myself giving answers I hadn't articulated before, to someone who listened like every word was data worth keeping. He was from Portland originally, Korean-American, second generation. His father a structural civil engineer who taught him to read blueprints before he could read chapter books. He'd grown up between two professional languages and two cultural registers and had resolved the tension, I came to understand, by building an internal architecture so precise that almost nothing caught him unprepared. I had built mine by never letting anything in. Wednesday evening, I found him in the secondary control room at 11 p.m., reviewing seismic monitoring logs. The overhead lights were at half power, energy conservation mode after primary operations shift, and without the full fluorescence he looked less armored. Glasses off, reading the printouts close. These minor events, he said, not looking up. The clustering in the past 3 weeks, have you flagged this with the seismology team? Yes. Pattern consistent with natural fault micro adjustment in the new Madrid zone. We increased monitoring frequency 2 weeks ago. I know, he tapped the log. Your team's response was exactly right. He looked up. Without the glasses, his eyes were darker, more direct than I'd calibrated for. I'm noting it. You have a feeling about it, I said. I don't work from feelings. I work from data. That's not what I asked. A pause longer than usual. The building made its quiet nighttime sounds. Ventilation systems, coolant flow, the low-frequency hum of 1,100 megawatts being managed 3 floors below us. Yes, he said finally. I have a feeling about it. That was Wednesday at 11 p.m. 43 hours later, the feeling arrived. Saturday morning, 1:22 a.m. I was 20 minutes into my overnight shift running a routine surveillance test on the primary coolant system when the seismic alarm activated. 2.8 magnitude, epicenter 12 miles southwest. The plant absorbed it like a slow breath. Instruments twitched and stabilized. I logged it, notified the shift manager, continued. At 2:41 a.m., the 4.1 magnitude hit. This one, the building moved. Not the disaster film floor lurching that people imagine when they imagine earthquakes, but a slow rolling pressure, like something enormous had turned over underneath us. Alarms stacked differently. Automatic SCRAM on both reactors, expected, correct, exactly what the design intended. I was on my feet and at the primary console before the sequence finished, walking the emergency checklist in the sequence I had rehearsed 300 times. Hands faster than thought, control rods fully inserted, reactor power 0, primary coolant flow. The anomaly appeared at 3:04 a.m. 4 of the 8 coolant flow indicators on reactor 2 showing a 12% departure from expected post-SCRAM values. This could be instruments, common mode failure on the transmitters, seismically induced. Could be actual reduced flow. I made the call. We are declaring an unusual event on reactor 2. Anomalous post-SCRAM coolant flow indication. Initiating emergency operating procedure R217, step 1. That's when Idris walked into the control room. I don't know why he was there at 3 a.m. He told me later that he'd felt the first tremor from his hotel room in Paducah and driven to the plant because his instincts said to be closer to the data. He was in his inspection jacket with his badge on, completely calm. Not the calm of someone who doesn't understand the situation, but the opposite. The calm of someone who understands it entirely and has already moved into their role. What do you need? He said. Q3 calibration records for R2 flow transmitters FT201 through FT208. They should be in the file station on your left. He was at the terminal before I finished the sentence. Last calibrated 61 days ago, within interval. No anomalous drift documented. Good. Doesn't rule out seismic instrument damage, but raises the probability of an actual flow event. Agreed. He didn't offer reassurance. He didn't say it was probably fine. He stayed with the data, completely present, and the steadiness of that, the refusal to soften uncertainty when uncertainty was what we actually had, was the most useful thing anyone could have done in that room. But the plant hadn't shown us its worst yet. The next 70 minutes were the kind of work that comes down to training and nothing else. My team was flawless. The shift manager held the center of the room. We escalated to alert status at 3:31 a.m. when the flow anomaly persisted beyond 20 minutes. The NRC Operations Center was notified correct on time. 2 of the 8 indicators recovered, confirming instrument damage. 4 remained anomalous at 3:44 a.m., I directed Idris and 2 non-essential control room operators to the secondary control building to retrieve the hard copy backup procedures for EOP R217 extensions. Precautionary measure in case of further seismic impact on the primary control room systems. At 3:47 a.m., the 4.7 magnitude hit. I have been in earthquakes before. A 3.2 in Nevada during training that rattled windows and slid a coffee cup across a counter. That was my entire reference library, and it prepared me for nothing. The building went sideways and then down, a double motion, like something had grabbed the structure and corrected course. The fluorescent lights flickered, cut, came back in emergency red. Emergency lighting protocol. Exactly correct. Exactly what's supposed to happen. And still the most disorienting thing I had ever seen. My entire world turning the color of an alarm. I kept working. Both hands on the console, voice controlled. Calling status. My team held. The plant held. She was built for this. Engineered with seismic margins for exactly this scenario. And she did precisely what she was designed to do. Both reactors stable, decay heat removal operational, water in the correct locations. At 4:02 a.m., the report came in. Emergency Cooldown Corridor B3 on the B level had experienced a security door failure during the seismic event. The corridor, a sealed access pathway between the auxiliary building and the secondary control room, had locked during the tremor. 2 people had been near it. One operator had cleared the door before it sealed, the other had not. I kept my voice from changing. I listened to the recording afterward. I know I kept my voice from changing, but something happened behind my sternum that I still don't have a clinical name for. B3 corridor security door failure. Person inside. Mr. Park, NRC. He's on the emergency intercom. No injuries reported. Structural integrity of corridor is confirmed. Maintenance responding to the door release mechanism. Estimated time to access, 40 to 60 minutes. 40 to 60 minutes? I had a plant to run. I had procedures in progress, an NRC operations center on the line, a shift manager coordinating with TVA emergency response. I had the most important job I had ever done happening in front of me, requiring every single piece of my attention. And I had Idris Park alone in a corridor in the dark, and the part of my brain that wasn't running emergency procedures was absolutely, quietly, irreversibly certain that it was not going to forgive me if I wasn't the one who opened that door. I did every step correctly. I ran the shift to completion. At 4:51 a.m., I handed over to my relief supervisor in good order, logged my status report, and walked down 2 floors and through 2 access corridors to B3. The door opened. The emergency lighting in B3 had failed 20 minutes in. The backup battery on that corridor segment was already on the maintenance schedule. It was corrected within the week, which meant Idris had been sitting in complete darkness on the floor, back against the coolant pipe housing with a dying phone flashlight, and whatever a person thinks about when there is nothing to do but think. He looked up when I came through the door. The flashlight pointed at the ceiling. In the mixed light of it and the corridor lights returning behind me, his face was half-lit and entirely unguarded, and the look in his eyes when he registered it was me, I'll try to describe it accurately. It was recognition, not surprise, not relief. Recognition. The kind that says, I knew it would be you, which made no logical sense because there was no procedural reason it had to be me specifically. But that's what it said. Are you hurt? I said, no. He stood, steady, unhurried, brushed dust from his inspection jacket. The plant? Both reactors stable, decay heat removal nominal. We're in alert status, my shift manager has it. Your team performed correctly. Flat, automatic, the way things come out when you've been sitting in the dark organizing thoughts for an hour, then you performed correctly. I know, I said, which wasn't arrogance. We both understood that. It was just true. He picked up his clipboard from the floor. The lower corner had snapped off. He looked at it a moment, turned it in his hands, set it on the pipe housing. Then he looked at me again, and neither of us was running through a checklist. I didn't like being in there, he said. Quiet. I know. I kept thinking about the flow anomaly, whether the escalation to alert was the correct call. Did you reach a conclusion? Yes, correct call. He paused. I also thought about other things. The corridor was narrow. We were closer than we'd stood at any point in the previous 5 days. Closer than the turbine building, closer than the conference room, closer than the seismic log review Wednesday night. Emergency lighting painted everything in hard contrast. Red and shadow. What other things? I said. He looked at the broken clipboard corner on the pipe housing. The fish sandwich. I had to stop. I laughed. A single involuntary sound that bounced off the concrete walls and came back to me different, lighter, real. And something in his face completed an opening, the way a door finishes swinging. Something that had been holding itself very correctly allowed itself to be human. We can get another fish sandwich. I said. It's Saturday, Friday only item, but I know a diner in Paducah. I know what day it is, he said. And then, precisely, carefully, exactly like him, he reached out and placed his hand on the back of my wrist, not taking it, just contact, resting there, a question in the form of a touch. I turned my wrist so my palm was open. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. We'd been communicating in data points and precise observations for 5 days. By that point, I think we were both done needing more words than this. If you've ever had a moment where everything you've been protecting yourself from stopped being threatening and became the thing you needed most, you know what happened in that corridor without me explaining it? We stood in B3 for 11 minutes. I know because there is an event log with door timestamps. His hand stayed on mine. His forehead came down and met mine, and we stood like that in the narrow space between the pipe housing and the corridor wall, and the building was still, and the plant was stable, and the new Madrid fault was holding its breath. I breathed him in, dust, adrenaline, something underneath that was just him. I don't usually, he started. I know, me either. I have 3 more days on this inspection. I know. His thumb moved across my knuckles. Deliberate, precise, exactly him, Callum, my name in his voice. First time he'd used it. I need to tell you something. Okay, your team's response during tonight's concurrent events was textbook. Your decision-making under seismic concurrent instrumentation anomaly conditions was, he stopped, reset. There won't be any citation. You did everything right. I didn't say thank you. I said, that's not what I'm thinking about right now. A breath, then, me neither. The next 3 days were the strangest professional experience of my life. We maintained every appropriate boundary in every appropriate context. Anyone observing us in the control room or conference room would have seen exactly what they needed to see. A senior reactor operator and an NRC inspector completing a thorough inspection. He didn't soften a single finding, and I didn't ask him to. The 3 remaining administrative items were formally closed out by Saturday afternoon. But at 7 p.m. on Saturday, when his site visit had officially concluded and his badge had been deactivated, and he was standing in the visitor parking lot with his briefcase and his rental car keys, he looked at me across the hood of that car the same way he'd looked at me in B3. There's a diner in Paducah, I said. You mentioned that. The fish sandwich is a Friday item, but their club sandwich is... I don't actually care about the sandwich, he said. Very calm, very exact. I know, I said. I don't either. We drove separately. The diner was called McNary's. Yes, same name as the plant. Everything in this county is named after the same geological feature. Vinyl booths, a jukebox with actual 45s, coffee and heavy ceramic mugs that a waitress named Pat refilled without being asked. We talked for 3 hours. Not about the plant, not about the inspection, about his father's structural engineering firm in Portland and the specific pressure of growing up between 2 cultures that both had strong opinions about precision and what it meant. About the summer I'd spent doing chainsaw qualification with the wildland fire crew at 19 because I needed something to test the exact limits of myself. About what it means to love something this complicated. A nuclear plant, a family, a version of yourself you've spent years constructing. And the particular loneliness of doing it very carefully in a world that doesn't always understand why the care matters. Are you still lonely? He asked. The coffee was at its 4th refill. I was, I said. I'm less certain about the present tense. He set his glasses on the table, rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture I'd come to read as him allowing something to be true before he said it. I have a question. Okay. When I return for the follow-up verification, 6 weeks, he looked up. Would you be willing to have dinner? Not at the plant, not professionally. I almost said something careful, something managed, something that kept the walls where I'd built them. I didn't. 6 weeks is a particular kind of time. I drove back to the plant that night for my 11 p.m. shift and sat in the parking lot longer than I should have, replaying 96 hours in the detail. You replay things when you understand they matter. Idris Park had walked into my plant with a clipboard and a mind built like a load-bearing structure and had found 3 documentation gaps and 1 reason to come back. He'd sat in a dark corridor for an hour and thought about the fish sandwich and the flow anomaly with equal seriousness. He'd put his hand on my wrist with the intentionality of someone who never touches anything without meaning to. At 10:47 p.m., I texted him from the parking lot. 6 weeks is a long time. His response came at 10:49. I'm aware. I've already begun reviewing the relevant regulatory framework. I stared at my phone. Are you telling me you're looking up whether NRC inspectors are permitted to date plant operators? I'm telling you I work from data, not feelings. And what does the data say? A pause. longer than his usual response interval, inconclusive. More information needed? In 6 weeks. In 6 weeks. Here's what nobody sees in the incident reports. The formal after-action review for the McNary River Nuclear Station response to the June new Madrid seismic sequence listed 9 commendation items and 2 corrective actions. The corrective actions were the B3 corridor backup battery replacement and a minor revision to EOPR 217 extension checklist. The commendations included my team's response time, our decision-making under concurrent anomaly conditions, and our communication with the NRC Operations Center. Idris Park's inspection finding report, submitted 31 days later, contained 0 violations and 4 administrative observations, each followed by a corrective action plan. It was objective, thorough, and exactly what it should have been. I read it 3 times. The broken clipboard corner was gone from the pipe housing when maintenance cleared B3 the following morning. I know because I walked through it before my shift. He'd taken it with him. I've never asked him about it directly. I don't need to. I almost didn't tell this last part, but you need to hear it. 6 weeks and 2 days after his rental car left this parking lot, it came back. 2 a.m. Early. I happened to be at the security gate escorting an incoming contractor. Completely true, completely coincidental. When Idris signed in at the desk, he accepted his visitor badge. Put on his glasses after signing the log, which I had never seen him do in that order before, which meant he'd been watching me before his vision was corrected. "Mr. Park?" I said. "Mr. Reyes," he said. "Follow-up verification?" "Correct." He glanced at the gate log, then at me. "You're off shift at 1800. "I am." "McNary's closes at 9. "It does. 3 hours." He picked up his briefcase. "Unless you'd prefer to try the fish sandwich this time." "It's a Thursday," I said. "I know what day it is." There is a camera in the McNary River Nuclear Station visitor parking lot. Security camera 7, covering the visitor bay and the main access gate. It records continuously at 1080p. The footage archives for 30 days before routine deletion. Nobody reviews parking lot footage unless there is an incident. There was no incident on the afternoon of July 17th on the footage timestamped 18:14. What is on that footage? A follow-up NRC inspection formally concluded. A visitor badge returned at the security desk. 2 men walking out into the late Kentucky summer evening through the main access gate. One of them carries a briefcase. The other has his hands in his pockets. They stop at the gate threshold, the exact boundary between the secured facility and the public access road, a line that means something specific in the regulatory framework and something different in any other. The recording is 22 seconds. In the first 8 seconds, nothing happens. They stand close enough that the camera captures them as a single shape in the low evening light. In the next 6 seconds, one of them says something, and the other tilts his head in a way that a stranger might read as professional evaluation, and that I would describe as the specific consideration he gives to things he's decided to care about precisely. In the last 8 seconds, Idris Park takes his glasses off with one hand and uses the other to press his palm against the side of my face. I don't know what I look like in that moment because I cannot watch myself understand something for the first time. But I know what I felt. The flat warmth of his hand against my jaw, the temperature of the July air, and the complete stillness of someone who has just decided to stop working from data. I lean my forehead against his. We don't move. Security camera 7 records us standing at the gate of a nuclear power station above the Kentucky River on a Thursday evening. In the second summer of our lives that matters, an NRC inspector and a senior reactor operator in qualification holding still together in the last of the long light. The plant hums behind us. 1150 megawatts, everything in its correct place. You okay? I keep being. Me too.